name is Jonker Hugo, or Hugo, if you'd like to say it in the native Dutch tongue. Hugo van Harlo. I am from the Low Countries, which would make me a Dutchman to most English or French or Spaniards even. Just don't call me a Hollander, because I'm not from Holland. Holland is its own province, and in fact I'm from a province to the northeast of Holland called Overijssel, where I'm a member of the local riddership, which is the collection of the local nobles, knights, and gentry, and in good standing, mind you, because I have a manorial hold of my own with property and lots of cows and goats to raise. Poor farming land, which makes it kind of rough, but we get by as much as we can. My manorial holdings in the village that I'm the administrator of as a member of the gentry, they're in Overijssel. When I don't want to spend time at the manorial holdings, because, well, frankly, now, in the year 1582, things are a bit, you could say dicey between the Low Countries and Philip II, King of Spain. It's been a bit of a protracted, let's just say, disagreement between the nature of the government around here and there in Madrid. So there's a loyalist faction just down the road, still in Overijssel, because Overijssel is composed of three different districts, you could say. You have the Vallenhal, which is closer to the Zuiderzee, which is the ocean, a large bay that empties out to the ocean. And then you have Saland, which is the middle part of Overijssel, which is where my manorial holdings are, close to the Salendisch Ridge. And then you have Twente, which is closer to the edge of the border with Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire. We still call them Germans. You call them Germans. We call them Germans. Everybody calls them Germans. However, in Twente, they're still very strongly Catholic. And me, well, I'm still, mostly Catholic. I go to Mass. I'm loyal to the Pope. I just, I'm not getting worked up over things as much as anybody else. And if you hear any rumors that my family or friends of mine or in my village are Reformed preachers preaching against the Pope and Rome, well, that's just a lie. It's not true. Don't worry about it. But in Twente, very strong, good Catholic noblemen and gentry, a lot of my friends, frankly, on the other side of this political disagreement that's stretching now into almost its 20th year. And so that means that they cross over into Saland, and because my holdings are close enough to the border with gentry in a town called Boer, that, it's my cattle and my sheep and my goats and my pigs that often enough get stolen and thieved from me, or the threat of being burnt out. So a lot of my attention is there when I can, or I'm in the town of Deventer, which is one of the three primary cities in Overijssel on the Ijssel River, and I have a town home there. Tense situations in Deventer as well, because, at the moment it is still under a Spanish garrison, and, as it turned out, I may or may not have leveraged some funds that my family has to raise infantry in service of the Dutch States General to fight against said Spanish and Catholic forces. But that was a couple of years ago. I'm back. I'm taking it easy in Overijssel. I just want to raise my cows. And, I might occasionally write some political pamphlets. Don't tell people about that either. That'd be great. And other than that, take it easy. Try and live a quiet life as much as I can, but it's hard to do in this day and age. 1580s are shaping up to be pretty rough for us. The Prince of Parma is now running the show down south in Flanders on behalf of his uncle, Philip II of Spain. And, we had a gentleman named the Duke of Alba in the 1560s, late 1560s, and he was a roughshod the Iron Duke. In fact, the Iron Duke is what we called him. A villain. That man was a villain. Parma, though, however, he's savvy, he's political, he's giving people fair options to surrender. If you're a member of the Reformed faith down in the southern Low Countries, you're not in fear for your life. He will give you a passport to go north. He's cutting people fair deals, and so that makes it hard for our one-time allies in Flanders and Brabant to continue to stick to the conflict and fight for our rights, because that's what this whole thing's boiling down to 20 some odd years on, is that Philip II is demanding rights that are not his to demand. He can't tax us. He can't force us into religious views of his own. He can't override our local rules and customs and traditions, destroy our judiciary, impose his own governors, impose his own judges, set up his own obscene taxes that drive us into the poorhouse. No, I can't allow that. I can't allow that. My father wouldn't have allowed that. My grandfather didn't allow it when Charles V came in and to try and take over Gelders and forced the Prince Bishop of Utrecht, who was the former sovereign of what is now Overijssel. No, I can't stand it. I have to fight for what is right. And what is right is that a man has a right to choose his religion. A man has a right to obey the customs and traditions of his own land, not Spain's. And a man has a right to contribute to his own governance. That's my right as a nobleman, as a man of the gentry. I have property, I have lands, I have heraldic arms that have gone back through 16 quarters of my family. I can't give that up no matter what Philip II or his agent Parma say. So that's what brings us here to 1582. The war hasn't gone real great, so that's why I'm back in Overijssel, trying to make sure that my cows and my sheep and my pigs and my goats are not thieved by Francisco Verdugo and his dogs, who are now posted up 20 miles away from my family's home. And if I can write a pamphlet or two in the time to get people on the same page, well, that works out pretty well too.
So if you had to travel far as part of your responsibilities?
Travel far as part of my responsibilities is a very nice way to say I hightailed it out of Overijssel in the Low Countries up to Emden. And I always get that pronunciation poorly, even though I spent a year and a half there once. Emden is just on the other side of Friesland. In fact, it's in eastern Friesland, which is still in Germany. The western side of Friesland is considered part of the Low Countries. The Frisians don't consider themselves part of either, but you know. But that's become a real safe haven for a lot of Dutch Protestants, which again, hey, I'm Catholic, so you know. But also freedom fighters from the Low Countries as well. It's a safe haven. So I've had to travel there. I've traveled, in fact, to Italy when I was a younger man. My father sent me there as part of my education. Beautiful place. Terrible corruption of the priests and the church. It's an embarrassing, sinful thing. So when I was coming back, I spent time in Geneva on my way, eventually making it back to Deventer and our holdings in Overijssel. But what I learned there from the church leaders in Geneva was a very inspiring thing, even though they are outside the grace of God and I'm a good Catholic.
So if there was one point in history of what's going on around you right now, what do you think is going to be the one thing that stands out when it's all done?
Hopefully, in the independent Dutch Republic. It's been a year now that the States General being the current governing body of the Low Countries, that we would say, even though Overijssel, here in Overijssel, again, we're all trying to be good Catholics here. We're having a current disagreement with Philip II, but we're trying to remain as much in fealty as we can, my previous sentiments being set aside, of course. And so my fellow men in the Ridderschappen and the burghers in the cities of Deventer, and then there's a town of Zwolle, have tried their best to find a middle way. And I actually respect that, even though I've raised my own pocketbooks, raised money to build a company of pikemen and arquebusiers to join the States General's fight down in Brabant and Flanders. I still respect the fact that my compatriots in Overijssel are trying to find that middle way. So we haven't signed this document that the States General has published a year ago called the Act of Abjuration, which is essentially deposing Philip II of any of his sovereignly being a word I just invented, it's his sovereign rights in the Low Countries. Do I wish they would? Yes. And I've been very clear about that. And the mayor of Brabant, not the mayor of Brabant, the mayor of Deventer, the Burgomeister, and I are one of the few people in Overijssel of such radical dispositions, you could say. But still, my friends are Catholic, and they're trying to find a middle way to keep us out of the war that has devastated Flanders and Brabant. And now Francisco Verdugo was in the north, and he's coming down from the north, and we have Parma coming up from the south, and it puts Overijssel in a very precarious position. We're not safe behind dikes and rivers and marshes in the way that Holland is. And we're not scattered across islands like Zeeland is, another province. We're not safe behind rivers like Utrecht is. We're easy to get to. We're exposed. Overijssel is exposed. And so it's easy to march armies. It's easy to bring raids in. As you've already heard me complaining about the Catholics and the Flemish and the Spaniards and the Italians who are 20 miles away from my home, who thieve things from me. So I understand wanting to find that middle ground. That being said, just to circle back to an independent Dutch republic, we've tried to give a kingship to Francis of France, the Duke of Anjou. We tried to offer it to Elizabeth I of England even. Both of them have not taken it outright. Francis, at least, has taken on some form of guardianship, but that's been an abysmal disaster. Even help from Austria and Vienna is not coming. So it might be that we end up being just that, a republic of gentry, a republic of God-fearing men who are trying to find our own way, and that is free from Philip's involvement, inappropriate involvement in the Low Countries. And if at the end of my life somehow I can be of service to that end, then I feel we have accomplished something.
So, who are you in modern life, and what do you do?
My name's Will Phillips. I am a digital strategist and user experience designer, and that's just a fancy way of saying all the research and planning and organization you need to do on a digital property like a website or an application before you actually start designing what it looks like. That's all my responsibility. So if you're using a banking app or a website and you find it easy to use and not a total pain in the ass, the people who do what I do are the folks to thank for that.
And how long have you been in the SCA?
I've been in the SCA for a total of about 4 years. I got started as a doe-eyed, naive college senior at Oklahoma State, which is Moonshadow in Onsteora. Played for about 1.5 years, and then moved out of Kingdom, moved to the West Coast, didn't play in the SCA as much as in really at all. Pretty quickly that my participation dropped off. And when I moved to Kansas City in early 2015 is when I first started to look back into the local SCA scene after starting to plug in online through Facebook in little dipping my toes in sort of ways. And so now I've been back involved in Palantir. Now this is summer of 2017 for about 2 years, pretty solidly now.
Good. And what's the one thing if you could learn about your persona that you'd really like to dive into?
Ooh, man. So I'll admit, as a guy who got really interested in a specific context and a specific time and place, I accidentally stumbled across the Dutch Revolt studying history and was immediately hooked. I was fascinated initially by the parallels that the Dutch Revolt had to the American War of Independence, this motley collection of infighting states that lost battle after battle after battle, but somehow was able to scrape together enough unity to come together and also outlast the military superpower of the day. I thought that was just fascinating. And combine that with other interests I have in the early modern period around book and print culture and cartography. A lot of that was happening in the Low Countries at the time, so I really dove in. And so it gives me a lot of opportunities to discover new things, because I'm really fortunate that late period, there's a fair amount of documentary evidence. If I want to find letters from Philip II, if I want to find inventories of books that a certain bookseller had, or I've been able to identify who the bookseller and book printer in Deventer during my time period, the early 1580s, late 1570s, is when I really focus in my studies on. I know who that was. So that being said, this is a total non-answer, because there's so many things I'd like to figure out. What I'm trying to understand right now is better understand the local context of what a historical Hugo's neighborhood would have been like, so to speak, in the different manors and holdings and towns and villages in Overijssel, because then I can really start to identify that conflict I was mentioning of Twente, the Spanish and Catholic held part of the province, versus Salland, which was held by Dutch independence, pro-Dutch independence forces. And so start to understand where those conflicts, because the war in the northeast part of the Low Countries at this time was very dissimilar from the stuff happening in the south in Flanders and Brabant, which was big set-piece battles and sieges, a lot of sieges. And up in the northeast, the territory is so marshy and boggy, and everything is so thickly populated, more or less, that what you see was a war of raids and setting up garrisons and building defenses, and then more raiding, more burning, more looting. The war, obviously war is never pretty. War always takes on a really ugly character, so it seems somewhat disingenuous for me to say it took on a particularly ugly character in the Northeast, but from what I understand, it did. And so in conjunction with immediately trying to understand the local, regional area that I'm focusing some of my studies in on, is also start to understand how that ties into some of the military conflict happening at that time.
And then last question is there one person out there amongst the populace that's doing something cool that you'd really like to learn a little bit more about?
So identifying just one person is tricky, but we have a really rich Norse community in Callantyre who have themselves gotten super nerdy, fascinated with Norse culture, and have done some really cool things that I would love to emulate that in a weirdo late period cuffs roughs standpoint of cultural events, cultural teaching, cultural immersion. I'm fascinated by the early modern period. I think that there's something really remarkable to be able to start to identify elements in culture and society and technology that we can still identify as hallmarks in our 21st century life that are appearing back then, so it doesn't feel quite as alien. And I like that sense of easier verisimilitude to, oh wow, this, they had judges, they had courts, they had the beginnings of news. Newspapers started to appear in the first 15 years of the 17th century in Germany, for example, big broadsheets. They had news pamphlets in the late 16th century. And so people like Joran Halgrim are doing really cool things that I really am fascinated by. You've got guys like Lucian on the Roman front who have really dived in and understand a lot of their culture. So people who are doing this cultural immersion thing, this historical reenaction thing, are folks that I'm endlessly inspired by.
Awesome. Thanks, Hugo.
Thanks, guys.